The universe was vast and ancient, filled with mysteries and marvels beyond human comprehension. Humanity had encountered countless alien species over centuries, each bringing new insights and challenges. But none had been as perplexing, as powerful, or as terrifying as the species that arrived in the year 2457, the Chronivores. The arrival of the Chronivores wasn't marked by the usual spectacle of a conquering fleet or a declaration of war. They appeared without warning, slipping into human space like shadows bending through time itself. They didn't attack with weapons or brute force. Their power was far subtler and far more terrifying. The Chronivores were able to control time. Reports from neighboring civilizations were vague, but deeply unsettling. An entire star system would go dark, transmissions suddenly ceasing. Scout ships sent to investigate would return with fragmented memories of time loops and living ghosts, as though entire planets were frozen in moments of repeating terror. The name Chronivores came from an ancient alien dialect, roughly translating to time eaters, an apt title for beings who seemed able to warp, stretch, and consume time at their will. Earth received its first direct communication from the Chronivores in the form of an eerie transmission that bypassed all security protocols and appeared simultaneously on every screen and device on the planet. A figure materialized. Its appearance was almost humanoid but blurred, as if its form was flickering between timelines. Its voice was low and resonant, echoing with the weight of ages. Humans, it intoned, each syllable vibrating with a disorienting sense of déjà vu. We are the Chronivores. You will surrender, or we will bend time around you until your civilization is dust. Panic swept across Earth. The Chronivores had already conquered several civilizations in the Milky Way, and those who hadn't fallen were in disarray, trapped in endless time loops or frozen in temporal stasis. Entire fleets from advanced species had been sent to face the Chronivores, only to return in fragments, soldiers aged to dust, ships impossibly corroded, or clocks warped beyond recognition. The United Earth Federation quickly convened an emergency meeting, bringing together Earth's top diplomats, scientists, and military strategists. General Marcus Hayes, a grizzled war veteran with experience in alien conflicts, stood at the head of the table. We're dealing with a species that's beyond anything we've encountered. They don't just control time, they are time. Standard tactics won't work. We need a strategy. Professor Arya Tanaka, one of Earth's leading temporal physicists, looked up from her datapad, her face pale. We have no effective defense against time manipulation on this scale. We barely understand time on a quantum level ourselves, and they're weaponizing it. We could be trapped in a time loop, frozen in place, or aged to death before we even fire a shot. An uncomfortable silence filled the room. Humanity's finest minds had nothing to offer in the face of such overwhelming power. As days passed, a strange pattern began to emerge. Every communication, every threat from the Chronivores demanded humanity's immediate compliance, with ominous deadlines attached. Surrender within the hour, one message read. Present your leaders to us in 3 hours, another stated. The deadlines came like clockwork, with the Chronivores expecting swift, precise responses. But humans, as it turned out, were terrible at being on time. When the first deadline came, the leaders who were supposed to be negotiating Earth's surrender were still scrambling to make sense of the Chronivores' messages. By the time they were ready to respond, the Chronivores had already delivered another warning, frustrated by humanity's apparent stalling tactics. The second deadline passed, and then the third. Each time, humanity missed it, unintentionally delaying the Chronivores' plans without even realizing it. What the Chronivores couldn't have anticipated was humanity's unique relationship with time. Humans had mastered space travel, developed quantum computing, and even experimented with rudimentary forms of temporal manipulation. But punctuality? That was a different story. Earth's leaders found themselves distracted by details, mired in committees, or delayed by technical difficulties. Each missed deadline only seemed to further anger the Chronivores. At first, Earth's diplomats thought they were playing with fire, desperately trying to formulate a strategy while simultaneously apologizing to the Chronivores for the delays. However, as the days stretched on, It became clear that these delays were beginning to wear on their enemies. One evening, General Hayes received a strange message from one of the forward outposts where the Chronivores had launched a small-scale attack. The outpost commander, a young officer named Lieutenant Priya Malik, had made a habit of sending late reports. As Hayes read her latest dispatch, he could hardly believe what he was seeing. Encountered Chronivore forces, the report read. They initiated a temporal field around our base. However, due to a delayed response from command, our troops were not in formation, and the attack missed us entirely. The Chronivores had attempted to freeze the outpost in time, a tactic that had proven devastating against other species. But because Malik's troops were scattered and unorganized, they had avoided the field's full effect. The Chronivores, relying on precise timing, had been thrown off by humanity's lack of synchronization. Intrigued, General Hayes forwarded the report to Professor Tanaka and Earth's Defense Council. After examining other reports, they found a similar pattern. Every time the Chronivores attempted to lock down a human facility or intercept human forces, they found themselves thwarted by the simple fact that humanity was late, chaotic, and disorganized. It wasn't long before humanity began to exploit this newfound weakness. Orders were intentionally delayed, fleet deployments were staggered with irregular timing, and critical meetings with the Chronivores were constantly rescheduled. The more humanity leaned into its natural tendency for lateness, the harder it became for the Chronivores to anticipate and control human movements. The Chronivores, beings of precision and timing, found themselves caught in a paradox. Their entire strategy relied on an enemy that moved predictably through time. Other species had been punctual, disciplined, and utterly vulnerable to time manipulation. But humanity? Humanity had no respect for time, and in doing so, had become an enigma. As the humans continued their campaign of organized chaos, the Chronivores attempted to adapt, creating larger and more flexible time fields. They tried to stretch their temporal control to cover wider areas and longer durations, but even these adjustments were met with resistance. Humanity's unpredictability simply couldn't be accounted for. Earth's leaders began to notice that the Chronivores, once so assured and imposing, were faltering. One day, a high-ranking Chronivore emissary named Scylla appeared on a human broadcast, its image projected onto every screen across Earth. Its normally calm and resonant voice now held a note of frustration. "Humans," it declared, struggling to maintain its composure, "we have given you every chance to surrender. Why do you resist in this chaotic manner? Why do you not follow time as all others do?" Humanity's response was almost laughable. In an impromptu press conference, an official replied, "Honestly, we're just kind of late to things. It's nothing personal. We're just not good with deadlines." The Chronivores couldn't comprehend it. Their civilization had been built on temporal discipline, their strategies honed over eons. The concept of lateness, of not moving in lockstep with time, was alien to them. And so, for the first time in their history, they found themselves at an impasse. As the Chronivores reeled, humanity quietly began developing countermeasures, collaborating on new technology to detect and neutralize temporal fields. The once dreaded power of the Chronivores was becoming less effective, not because of some grand military victory, but simply because humanity couldn't be on time. And so, as the Chronivores struggled to contain humanity's unpredictable nature, they began to experience something they had never felt before: doubt. Humanity's chaotic resistance was beginning to wear them down, and their once unstoppable conquest was starting to look more like a drawn-out struggle than a swift victory. The Chronivores, masters of time, were learning a humbling lesson. In the face of sheer unpredictability, even the greatest powers could falter. For the first time, the galaxy had hoped that humanity might be able to withstand the unstoppable force of the Chronivores, not by power or precision, but by the sheer chaos of human lateness. As Earth's leaders pieced together the baffling reports of success against the Chronivores, a strange realization began to sink in. Humanity's chronic lateness and unpredictable schedules weren't just inconveniences. They had become assets. The Chronivores, so used to a universe that moved with precision, were genuinely flustered by humanity's inability to keep a schedule. To the Chronivores, time was sacred. Their civilization was built on a foundation of perfect synchronization. Their lives, their battles, their art, all ran according to strict temporal codes. Every citizen, from the lowliest worker to the highest-ranking temporal master, operated with flawless precision. It was a cultural trait, woven into their very essence. The Chronivores had never encountered a species that treated time with anything less than respect. But then there were humans. Earth's top military and scientific minds convened to address the new reality of the war. General Marcus Hayes, still skeptical of this unconventional approach, addressed his council. "So, what you're telling me," he said, trying to keep the disbelief out of his voice, "is that the best strategy we have against a species that can literally control time is to keep being late?" Professor Arya Tanaka, who had been studying the Chronivores' temporal abilities, gave him a thin smile. "It sounds absurd, I know, but think about it. Every civilization the Chronivores have conquered was punctual, organized, and efficient. Their power relies on manipulating predictable behaviors. The way they freeze moments, rewind time, or speed things up only works if they can anticipate where their enemies will be and when. Our delays, as frustrating as they are, make it impossible for them to control the battlefield." Across the table, Lieutenant Priya Malik, whose delayed troop formation had accidentally avoided the Chronivores' first temporal field, leaned forward. "It's not just lateness, sir. It's unpredictability. If we keep them guessing, never moving in sync, never operating on a consistent schedule, they can't get a foothold. They're trying to manipulate time around us, but they keep missing because they expect us to be, well, on time." The idea was wild, even for humanity's flexible standards. But the evidence was there. Each time the Chronivores attempted an assault, they found themselves frustrated by humanity's erratic behavior. Earth's leaders decided to make unpredictability their official tactic. Operation Unbound, as it was formally named, was a military campaign like no other. General Hayes and his staff met with division leaders and diplomatic liaisons, instructing them to abandon traditional schedules and embrace a calculated chaos. Entire fleets would move at irregular intervals, often delayed intentionally. Orders were given to soldiers with instructions to interpret timing loosely, a phrase that had never before been used in official protocols. Even supply chains, typically the backbone of any military effort, were disrupted on purpose. At first, implementing this plan seemed almost comical. Soldiers accustomed to drills and routines found themselves ordered to improvise, to change directions unexpectedly, to hold position at random locations for unspecified periods. Scientists working on defenses and research projects were told to stagger their shifts randomly, creating a constant flux in project timelines. A typical military campaign was a masterpiece of coordination. Operation Unbound, by contrast, looked like complete disorganization to any outsider. The Chronivores' response was swift and utterly ineffective. Their temporal manipulations became scattered and unpredictable as they tried to account for human delays. When they launched an attack on Earth's defenses over Luna, they anticipated the fleet would be stationed according to the most efficient defensive formation. Instead, the fleet was scattered, with key ships delayed or stationed in seemingly random positions, creating gaps that the Chronivores misjudged. Ships moved in erratic patterns, completely unsynchronized with each other, which left the Chronivores' forces unable to isolate and trap any one formation. A few Chronivore operatives attempted to intervene directly on the ground, hoping that face-to-face contact with human leaders might instill some discipline and order. But even these attempts failed, as meetings were canceled last minute, officials arrived hours late, or the humans simply forgot to attend. It became a running joke among Earth's forces. What's the Chronivores' biggest weakness? Our calendar. At one point, a Chronivore delegation arrived in the council hall to negotiate with Earth's diplomats. They had been summoned to discuss terms, and Earth's representatives had even promised to start the meeting precisely at 0900. But as the hour came and went, the humans had yet to show up. Minutes passed, then an hour, and still no one arrived. The Chronivores, creatures who thrived on efficiency, sat in growing frustration. For them, an hour felt like an eternity. Finally, two human diplomats rushed into the room, looking apologetic. "Terribly sorry," one of them said, fumbling with his documents. "Traffic was worse than we expected. Got a bit held up with the coffee machine, too." The Chronivore leader, a being named Soreth, let out a low, resonant hum of displeasure. "Humans," it said, its voice vibrating with barely contained frustration. "Do you not understand the importance of time? Our species moves in harmony with the temporal flow. Your delays are an insult." The diplomat simply shrugged. "Guess we're just not built that way. Punctuality has never been our strong suit." The exchange was reported across human channels, and soon it became common knowledge that the Chronivores were struggling to adapt to Earth's loose approach to time. Memes and jokes spread across Earth. The phrase, "the clock is optional," becoming a rallying cry for a species that had turned its greatest flaw into an unlikely advantage. But beneath the humor, there was real risk. Humanity's strategy of delay was not foolproof. The Chronivores were still immensely powerful, and their temporal abilities gave them an edge if they could just pin down human movements. They began adapting their tactics, launching larger temporal fields to account for Earth's unpredictability. Some regions experienced time distortions that stretched or compressed hours. A few human installations even became trapped in minor loops, with soldiers experiencing the same moment repeatedly, unable to break free. Earth's leaders knew they couldn't rely solely on lateness forever. To win, they would need a permanent counter to the Chronivores' temporal manipulation. Thus, while the defense forces embraced chaos, Earth's scientific community poured its resources into developing time-resistant technology. Professor Tanaka led a team dedicated to creating chronodampeners, devices designed to counteract the effects of temporal fields. These devices were experimental and untested, but with humanity's chaotic tactics buying them time, scientists made rapid progress. In the meantime, stories of the Chronivores' missteps and frustrations circulated among other species, many of whom had already surrendered to the Chronivores' might. To them, humanity's resilience was nothing short of miraculous. Species who had once seen Earth as a minor player in the galaxy began reaching out, inspired by tales of humans arriving late to battles or thwarting the Chronivores with sheer unpredictability. A few even dared to join the resistance, adopting humanity's strange, chaotic strategies in their own fight against the Chronivores. As Operation Unbound unfolded, Earth's Defense Council monitored reports of unrest among the Chronivores themselves. In one intercepted transmission, a Chronivore commander lamented to his superior, "They do not follow the flow of time. They are chaos embodied. How can we control that which does not respect time?" Humanity, unknowingly, was forcing the Chronivores to confront their own limitations. For the first time, their mastery of time was failing them, and the very concept of lateness had become an existential threat to a species that depended on temporal control. The battle reached a turning point when the first prototype chronodampeners were installed in key defense stations. When the Chronivores launched another assault, they found that their temporal fields could no longer stretch as far or freeze as easily. Humanity's chaotic movements continued to evade them, but now, with the added protection of chronodampeners, Earth's forces began to push back. The tide was beginning to turn, but for all their newfound success, humanity's leaders knew that this victory had been anything but conventional. They had relied on their very flaws to survive, turning lateness, procrastination, and disorganization into strengths. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Humanity had outlasted one of the most powerful species in the galaxy, not by perfecting its strengths, but by embracing its imperfections. As the Chronivores continued to falter, the once dismissed humans became a symbol of hope across the galaxy. Messages of encouragement flooded in from other worlds, as did offers to join Earth's resistance. By now, it was clear that humanity was not only holding the line against the Chronivores, but actively inspiring others to defy them as well. Operation Unbound, once a desperate measure, had transformed into a beacon of resilience. And as the Chronivores scrambled to adapt, one truth echoed across the galaxy. You couldn't control what didn't follow a schedule. As Earth's chaotic resistance continued to frustrate the chronivores, a strange quiet descended upon the galaxy. News of humanity's resilience and the unexpected success of Operation Unbound spread, inspiring hope among those who had once felt doomed. Species that had long since surrendered to the chronivores' grip began to reconsider, watching closely as humans held out. Some even started experimenting with human-inspired strategic lateness, finding that a disorganized schedule offered some limited protection from the chronivores' time-manipulating power. Yet, despite these small victories, humanity knew they couldn't win this war on unpredictability alone. The chronivores were immensely powerful, their understanding of time far beyond anything humanity could comprehend. Earth's leaders recognized that it was only a matter of time before the chronivores adapted fully to the chaos of human behavior. They needed something more, something that would not only delay the chronivores but disrupt their power entirely. In a secret research lab hidden deep within the asteroid belt, Professor Arya Tanaka and her team had been working tirelessly on a solution. The first generation of chronodampeners had provided some defense against the chronivores' attacks, but it was clear that humanity needed something stronger. After months of intense research, Tanaka and her team had finally developed the prototype for a new device, something they called the temporal oscillator. The temporal oscillator was designed not just to disrupt the chronivores' temporal fields, but to destabilize them, creating localized time distortions that would interfere with any attempts to manipulate time within a given radius. It was humanity's first real offensive weapon against the chronivores, and if it worked as intended, it could turn the tide of the entire war. General Marcus Hayes, Professor Tanaka, and Earth's top military and scientific leaders met in a secure underground bunker to discuss their plan to deploy the temporal oscillator. Hayes stood at the head of the table, his face grim but determined. "The chronivores have pushed us to the brink," he began, looking around at his colleagues. "But thanks to all of you, we now have something that might finally give us a fighting chance. We'll launch a final assault, targeting the chronivores' main base. If we can destabilize their time fields, we might be able to break their control over the galaxy once and for all." Professor Tanaka nodded. "The temporal oscillator isn't perfect, and we haven't tested it in a large-scale deployment. But if we can get close enough to their central command, the oscillator should create a disruption in their temporal fabric, destabilizing their power at its source." The plan was ambitious, and it carried enormous risks. To reach the chronivores' command center, humanity would have to send a fleet into deep space, past a dense web of temporal fields. The chronivores' main base, known as the Eternal Nexus, was located in a sector of the galaxy that they had locked in a time-looped fortress, a place where hours, days, and even years flowed in ways no human could comprehend. The mission, codenamed Operation Temporal Storm, would involve sending a fleet equipped with the temporal oscillator directly into the heart of the Nexus. It would be dangerous, and even with humanity's unpredictability advantage, there was no guarantee that they would survive the journey. But Earth's leaders knew it was the only way to end the chronivores' reign. The day of the launch was tense. The fleet, led by Admiral Jonas Reed, was outfitted with the latest chronodampeners, along with humanity's best ships and technology. At the center of the fleet was the SS Paradox, a heavily armored battleship that housed the temporal oscillator itself. Every crew member had volunteered, understanding that this mission might be their last. As the fleet set off toward the Eternal Nexus, Admiral Reed addressed his crew over the comms. "We've been underestimated, ignored, and even laughed at by these so-called masters of time. But today, we show them what humanity can do. We may not move in perfect unison, and we may not be punctual, but that's what makes us strong. Remember, we're not just fighting for Earth. We're fighting for every being in this galaxy that deserves to live free." The journey through the Nexus's outer defenses was harrowing. The chronivores deployed a series of increasingly complex temporal traps, from time loops that tried to trap ships in endless cycles to temporal whirlpools that compressed time, aging ships and their crews within seconds. But Earth's fleet pressed on, using irregular flight patterns and unpredictable maneuvers to navigate through the traps. Ships zigzagged, spun in random directions, and split apart only to reform, confounding the carnivores' efforts to predict their path. Finally, after hours of intense navigation, the fleet breached the last temporal field and arrived at the heart of the Eternal Nexus. The structure was unlike anything they'd ever seen, a massive spherical fortress, pulsing with an eerie, temporal energy that distorted reality around it. The Nexus seemed to be both ancient and futuristic at once, as if it existed in multiple time periods simultaneously. Shimmering with impossible light, it loomed over the fleet like a cosmic heartbeat. Inside the Nexus, the carnivores were waiting. Dozens of carnivore ships appeared, surrounding Earth's fleet. The carnivore leader, Soreth, materialized on the Paradox's main screen. His form, usually shifting and indistinct, was now focused, an imposing figure whose very presence seemed to bend time itself. Humans, Soreth intoned, his voice echoing with timeless resonance. You have meddled with forces beyond your understanding. Your chaos may have shielded you thus far, but it ends here. You cannot disrupt the flow of eternity. Admiral Reed smirked, unfazed by Soreth's grand speech. You carnivores think time is something you can own, something you can bend to your will. But time doesn't belong to anyone. And if there's one thing we humans know, it's how to adapt to the unexpected. With that, he gave the order to activate the temporal oscillator. The device hummed to life, sending out pulses of temporal distortion that radiated from the paradox. The effect was immediate. The carnivore ships around them began to waver, their movements becoming erratic as the oscillator disrupted their ability to control time. Within seconds, the carefully synchronized formations of the carnivore fleet fell apart, ships drifting and stuttering as their temporal abilities faltered. Inside the Eternal Nexus, alarms blared. The carnivore's entire command structure was collapsing under the oscillator's influence. For the first time, they were experiencing what it was like to lose control of time. To the carnivores, who had always operated with perfect temporal discipline, the sensation was horrifying, a complete unraveling of their reality. In the chaos, the Paradox and its escort ships pressed forward, targeting the heart of the Nexus. Each pulse from the oscillator expanded the disruption, destabilizing the temporal field that surrounded the fortress. Carnivore ships attempted to mount a counterattack, but without their time manipulation, they were no match for Earth's forces. As the fleet closed in on the Nexus's central core, Soreth reappeared, his once powerful form now flickering, barely able to maintain cohesion. You cannot comprehend the cost of this, he stammered, struggling to remain anchored in the present. Time will consume you. Professor Tanaka, observing from the Paradox's control room, responded with a calm defiance. Perhaps, but we're not afraid of change. Unlike you, we've learned to live with it. With a final order, Admiral Reed directed all firepower at the core. The temporal oscillator unleashed one last, powerful pulse, resonating through the heart of the Eternal Nexus. The fortress, unable to maintain its temporal integrity, began to collapse, imploding in a blinding burst of light. Reality seemed to warp and twist, as if the very fabric of time was tearing apart. When the light faded, the Nexus was gone. The carnivores, their source of power destroyed, had vanished, unable to sustain themselves without the temporal structure that had anchored them to this universe. Earth's fleet, battered but victorious, watched in awe as the once unstoppable force simply ceased to be. Back on Earth, word of the victory spread like wildfire. Humanity had done the impossible, defeating an enemy that had once seemed invincible. As the dust settled, Earth's leaders reflected on what they had achieved. They had fought a battle not just with weapons, but with the very nature of human existence, chaos, adaptability, and a refusal to bow to anyone else's sense of order. In the months that followed, humanity worked alongside other liberated civilizations to rebuild what had been lost. Earth became a beacon of hope and defiance, a symbol of resilience in the face of overwhelming odds. And though the carnivores had been defeated, humanity never forgot the lessons they had learned. For a long time, The phrase, "time waits for no one," had been a saying among humans. But now it had a new meaning. Humanity had stood against time itself and won.